The wind howled softly across the barren hills of Ramah. The sky, painted in shades of gold and crimson, seemed to hold its breath. In a humble house of stone, a child knelt beside his bed, whispering words to a God he had not yet seen, but somehow felt. His name was Samuel, the son of Hannah, a woman whose prayers had once pierced the heavens. She had promised her son to the Lord even before his birth. And now, as twilight fell, that promise echoed through destiny itself. Outside, the temple lamps flickered, casting trembling shadows upon the old sanctuary of Shiloh. Within its sacred walls, the priest Eli tended the fading flame of faith in a nation drifting from its God. Israel was weary, divided, uncertain, and the voice of the Lord had grown silent. But in that silence, something stirred. The boy Samuel felt it first, a whisper, faint yet alive. A call, not from man, but from heaven. He opened his eyes, heart pounding. "Eli," he asked softly. No answer, only the still hum of night. And then again, that same voice calling his name. "Samuel." He rose, uncertain yet drawn by something greater than fear, something divine. The night of his destiny had begun. The boy's footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor as he hurried through the dimly lit corridors of the temple. The torches trembled, their light flickering across ancient carvings of angels and sacred words, guardians of a forgotten faith. He reached the sleeping chambers and gently shook the old priest. "Eli, I heard you call me," Samuel whispered. Eli stirred, his weary eyes blinking through the haze of sleep. "My son," he murmured, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Confused but obedient, Samuel returned to his mat. The temple was still again. The night air carried a sacred chill. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet. And then the voice came once more, stronger this time, almost tender. "Samuel." His eyes flew open. He rose, heart racing, and ran to Eli again. "Here I am, for you called me." Eli sat up now, a flicker of unease in his aged face. "My son, I did not call. Lie down once more." Samuel hesitated, glancing toward the inner sanctuary, the holy place where the Ark of the Covenant rested. Something inside him trembled, not with fear, but with awe. He obeyed once more, lying in the darkness that felt alive. And then, for the third time, the voice, soft, powerful, unmistakable. "Samuel, Samuel." This time, as he rose, the air around him shimmered faintly, like the presence of a king unseen. He ran again to Eli. "Here I am, you called me." And in that moment, the old priest understood. His heart sank and lifted all at once. It was not he who had called the boy, it was God himself. Eli's voice trembled as he said, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel nodded. The destiny of a prophet had begun to unfold. Samuel lay down once more, the words of Eli echoing in his heart. The temple seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as though every stone, every flame, every breath waited for what was to come. He closed his eyes, but the air felt different now. The silence was no longer empty. It was holy. Then, in the stillness, the voice came again, not as a whisper this time, but as the presence of eternity itself. "Samuel, Samuel." The boy sat up, trembling, his voice barely a breath. "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And in that instant, light filled the room. Not sunlight, but something purer, something that seemed to come from within the very air. The Lord spoke. "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. For I will fulfill all that I have spoken concerning Eli and his house, because his sons have defiled my sanctuary, and he has not restrained them." Samuel's small hands gripped the edge of his mat, his heart pounding with fear and wonder. The words burned into him, and heavy, divine, unstoppable. The vision faded, the light dimmed, but the echo of God's voice remained, like thunder that refused to die. He did not sleep again that night. He lay awake, staring into the shadows, feeling the weight of prophecy for the first time. Outside, dawn broke over Shiloh. Golden light spilled across the temple floor, touching the Ark of the Covenant as if heaven itself had drawn near. Samuel knew he would never be the same again. The morning sun rose over Shiloh, painting the sky in hues of amber and fire. Birds stirred in the trees, and the temple bells echoed faintly across the hills. But inside, Samuel's heart was still trapped in the silence of the night before. He sat near the altar, eyes fixed on the glowing embers, afraid to speak and afraid to remember. He had heard the voice of the Almighty. He had seen the light of heaven, and now he carried a message that would shatter his teacher's heart. Eli's footsteps approached slowly, the shuffle of an old man burdened by years of guilt and fading strength. "Samuel, my son," he said softly, "what was it that the Lord told you?" Samuel hesitated. His hands trembled. He did not want to hurt the man who had raised him, the only father he had ever known. Eli placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Do not hide it from me. Whatever the Lord said, tell me." The boy swallowed hard. Then, with a voice fragile yet honest, he spoke every word. He told Eli about the judgment to come, the sins of his sons, the corruption in the priesthood, the end of an era. Eli closed his eyes as tears welled within them, yet he did not protest. He simply whispered, "He is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." The words hung heavy in the air, surrender mixed with sorrow. In that moment, Samuel learned what it meant to carry the truth, no matter how heavy. And as the day unfolded, a quiet awe filled the hearts of those who saw him. For it was said throughout Shiloh that morning, "The Lord has spoken again, and his voice came through a child." From that day forward, Samuel grew in wisdom, in strength, and in the Spirit of God. The silence of Israel was broken, and a prophet had risen. Years passed. The child who once trembled before the voice of God had become a man whose words carried divine fire. Israel had fallen into shadow. The Philistines grew strong, their armies pressing against the borders like a storm about to break. Corruption still haunted the hearts of men, and faith, though rekindled, flickered under the weight of fear. But Samuel stood firm. Where Eli had faltered, Samuel listened. Where others doubted, he believed. He walked among the people, a prophet wrapped in humility, a judge whose eyes seemed to see beyond the flesh into the soul. When he spoke, the nation listened. When he prayed, the heavens answered. One evening, as twilight touched the fields of Mizpah, Samuel called the tribes together. His voice rose over the murmuring crowd like thunder over the mountains. "If you are truly returning to the Lord with all your hearts," he cried, "then rid yourselves of your idols and foreign gods. Prepare your hearts for the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines." The people trembled. The memory of their defeats burned fresh, and yet hope flickered again. All across Israel, men and women cast away their idols, breaking them upon the rocks. They gathered water and poured it out before the Lord, a symbol of surrender, a sign that they were ready to be reborn. Samuel raised his staff high toward the darkening sky. "Lord of hosts," he cried, "forgive your people and fight for them once more." And as thunder rolled across the horizon, the wind shifted. The heavens stirred. A storm was coming, not of rain, but of destiny. Dark clouds gathered above the hills as the armies of Israel stood trembling at Mizpah. Across the valley, the Philistines advanced, chariots rumbling, swords glinting like fire under the storm's shadow. Men clutched their spears tighter, whispering prayers, fear etched across their faces. They had no king, no mighty warrior, only faith, and a prophet. Samuel stood before them, cloak whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the heavens. Lightning crackled across the sky as he lifted a lamb, an offering to the Lord, and laid it upon the altar. "O Lord God of Israel," he cried, "do not remain silent. Deliver your people this day." The Philistines roared as they charged forward. But before steel met flesh, the heavens answered. A thunderclap unlike any before shattered the sky. The ground trembled. Lightning struck the earth with blinding fury. The Philistine ranks faltered, their chariots overturned in the chaos. Horses screamed, men fell, and the sound of thunder rolled like the wrath of heaven itself. The Israelites watched in awe, and then surged forward with courage ignited. They pursued their enemies from Mizpah to Bethkar, their cries echoing like the song of a people reborn. When the battle ended, the storm began to fade. The air smelled of rain and victory. Samuel knelt among the fallen stones and raised a great rock upon the field. He called its name Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." The people of Israel fell to their knees, tears of joy mingling with the dust of triumph. For the first time in generations, Israel had seen it, the living power of God moving among them. And Samuel knew this was only the beginning. Years passed, and the land grew quiet once more. The Philistines dared not cross Israel's borders again, for the memory of thunder still haunted them. Under Samuel's guidance, peace and justice returned. The prophet traveled from town to town, from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, settling disputes, teaching righteousness, and reminding the people of the God who had saved them. Children grew up hearing his name with reverence. Old men spoke of the night when heaven itself had fought beside them. Israel was free, and yet in the heart of the nation a new restlessness began to stir. Samuel was old now. His hair had turned silver like the dust of dawn. His sons, whom he had appointed as judges, did not walk in his ways. They took bribes, twisted justice, and brought shame to his name. Whispers spread among the elders of Israel. "If Samuel is gone, who will lead us? We need a ruler like the other nations. We need a king." And so one morning, as the prophet prayed beside the altar, the elders came to him in solemn procession. Their leader stepped forward, voice steady but proud. "Behold, you are old," he said, "and your sons do not walk in your ways. Appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." The words struck Samuel like a blade to the heart. The people who had once begged God for deliverance now wanted to trade his reign for a crown of man. Samuel turned away, his eyes burning with sorrow. He went to the Lord in prayer, his voice heavy with pain. "They have rejected me," he whispered. But the voice of God came, calm and firm. "No, Samuel, they have not rejected you. They have rejected me from reigning over them." Tears fell down his weathered face as he listened. God would give them what they asked for, but it would come with a cost. The next day the people gathered before Samuel in the great square of Mizpah. Men, women, and children filled the valley like a sea of restless hearts. They had come for one thing, a king. Samuel stood before them, the wind tugging at his mantle, his staff trembling in his aged hands. His eyes swept across the crowd, the same people who had once wept before the altar, who had cried for mercy and victory. Now they stood proud, eager for power, blind to the danger ahead. He raised his voice and silence fell. "Hear me, O Israel," he cried, "and you say, 'Give us a king to judge us.' But do you know what it is you ask for?" The people murmured. Samuel's voice grew stronger, filled with sorrow and holy fire. "This will be the manner of the king who shall reign over you. He will take your sons and make them serve in his armies. He will take your daughters to serve in his palaces. He will claim your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves. He will take 1/10 of your grain, your flocks, your labor. And you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you." His words thundered across the crowd like prophecy itself. But the people's hearts were hard. They shouted back as one voice, "No, we will have a king over us. We want to be like the nations. Our king shall lead us and fight our battles." Samuel stood motionless, the echo of their cries fading into the hills. He looked to the sky, the same heavens that had once answered him with lightning and fire. This time they were silent. He bowed his head. The people had made their choice. When night fell, Samuel returned to the altar and knelt before the Lord. His heart was heavy, but his faith was unbroken, and God spoke once more. "Listen to their voice, and make them a king." Samuel rose slowly, the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. A king would rise, but the path ahead would be carved in blood, pride, and heartbreak. Far from Shiloh in the rugged hills of Benjamin, a young man searched for his father's lost donkeys. His name was Saul, son of Kish, tall, strong, and striking to behold. Among all the men of Israel, none stood higher than he. But beneath his strength, there was a gentleness and an uncertainty. For 3 days, Saul wandered the countryside with his servant, finding nothing. The sun burned hot upon the land, and despair began to settle over them. At last his servant spoke. "In this city there is a man of God. All that he says surely comes to pass. Let us go to him. Perhaps he can tell us which way to go." Saul hesitated. "But what shall we bring him? We have nothing left to offer." The servant smiled faintly and pulled out a small silver coin. "Perhaps this will be enough." And so they went. As Saul climbed the hill toward the city of Ramah, the wind carried the scent of incense and cedar. The prophet Samuel stood nearby, watching the road, as if he had been waiting all along. The Lord had spoken to him the night before. "Tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. You shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He will save them from the hand of the Philistines, for I have looked upon my people, and their cry has come to me." And now, as Saul approached, Samuel's eyes filled with divine recognition. The Spirit whispered in his heart, "Behold, the man of whom I spoke to you, this one shall reign over my people." Saul bowed before him, unaware of the destiny unfolding in the air around them. "Please tell me," he said, "where is the seer's house?" Samuel smiled, his gaze both kind and piercing. "I am the seer," he replied. "Come with me, and you shall eat at my table today. For tomorrow I will tell you what is in your heart." And as the sun set over Ramah, the first threads of a crown began to weave themselves into the story of Israel. Morning light spilled through the narrow streets of Ramah. The city was quiet, wrapped in a calm that felt almost divine. Samuel rose early, his heart heavy yet resolute. He had spent the night in prayer, wrestling with what was to come, the birth of a kingdom and perhaps the fall of faith itself. When Saul approached, the prophet's eyes softened. The young man still looked confused, unaware of the storm that heaven was about to stir around him. Samuel took him aside to a quiet place on the city's edge, the fields still wet with dew, the sky opening in soft gold. There, away from the eyes of men, destiny spoke through the prophet's hands. Samuel reached into his cloak and drew forth a small flask of oil, sacred and fragrant. He uncorked it slowly, the scent of myrrh and olive filling the air. Then, with solemn reverence, he poured it upon Saul's head. The oil gleamed in the morning sun, dripping down his brow like liquid fire. "Has not the Lord anointed you to be ruler over his inheritance?" Samuel declared. The wind rose, gentle yet mighty, and for a brief moment Saul felt something greater than himself stir within his chest. A warmth, a weight, a whisper. Samuel leaned close and spoke softly, "When you leave me today, signs will follow you, and the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you. You will be changed into another man." Saul looked into the prophet's eyes and saw both blessing and burden there. He bowed low, trembling. The moment was brief, but it echoed through eternity, for in that field between heaven and earth a crown was born. As Saul turned to leave, Samuel watched him go, the flask still glistening in his hand. He knew what the people could not yet see, that the rise of a king would test the soul of a nation. Saul left Samuel's side, the scent of oil still clinging to his hair, and walked down the winding road toward Gibeah. His mind raced with confusion. The weight of an unseen presence pressed upon him, and yet he could not resist its power. Suddenly the air around him shimmered. A fire seemed to ignite in his heart, coursing through his veins, lifting him higher than fear or reason could reach. Before him, the people of the city began to gather, curious at the young man who had just returned from Samuel's house. They saw him shaking, eyes wide, lips moving in words they could not understand. And then it became clear. Saul was prophesying. He spoke of visions, of victory, of judgment, and of the Spirit of the Lord that now dwelled within him. The elders stared in awe, their mouths agape. The soldiers paused, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or madness. Word spread like wildfire. "Saul is among the prophets. The Spirit of God has come upon him." Those who had once doubted, who had whispered about the boy king of Benjamin, now bowed in fear and reverence, for they knew that the hand of God had touched him, and no man could stand against what heaven had begun. Saul himself trembled, barely able to stand, yet strangely elated. The Spirit lifted him, transformed him, and whispered of battles yet to come, victories, failures, and the heavy crown he would bear. Samuel watched from a distance, heart heavy with understanding. The young man had been chosen and the Spirit had fallen, but the road ahead was long, filled with triumph and tragedy alike. And so the first king of Israel had begun his reign, not with a crown nor with armies, but with the fire of God blazing through his soul. The people of Israel could hardly believe their eyes. Saul, once a humble young man searching for lost donkeys, now walked among them like a figure chosen by heaven itself. His presence commanded attention. His voice carried the fire of prophecy. Word spread quickly across the tribes. The Lord has anointed a king among us, and the people flocked to him, their hearts filled with hope and awe. Soon the Philistines, sensing the stirring of Israel, advanced again with prideful strength. The elders turned to Saul, their eyes wide with fear. "Lead us," they cried. "Show us the path to victory." Saul raised his hand, the Spirit of God surging within him like a storm. He rallied the people with courage and clarity beyond his years. "Do not fear," he declared. "The Lord of Israel is with us. Today we fight, and today we shall triumph." The Israelites surged forward, their hearts emboldened by divine fire. Clash met clash on the battlefield. The Philistines pressed hard, but Saul's men, inspired by his vision, fought with the courage of lions. Every sword stroke, every cry, every charge seemed guided by an invisible hand. And when the dust cleared, the battlefield was quiet. The Philistines had been routed, fleeing in terror. The people fell to their knees, weeping with relief and joy. Saul, once unsure and timid, now stood as a symbol of God's deliverance. But as Samuel watched from the hilltop, his heart was heavy. Victory had come, yes, but the spirit that had risen in Saul could fade if the heart turned from obedience. He knew that a crown, though anointed by God, carried a weight beyond gold, and the greatest battle for Saul's soul was yet to come. After the battle, the people of Israel celebrated with joy and song, praising Saul as their deliverer. Yet Samuel called him aside, to a quiet place away from the clamor of victory. The prophet's eyes, grave and steady, pierced through the young king's heart. "Saul," Samuel said, "the Lord has anointed you to be king over his people. But listen carefully. The Lord desires obedience, not sacrifice. If you walk in his ways and follow his commands, your throne will endure. But if you turn aside even a little, the crown will slip from your grasp and your glory will fade." Saul nodded, humbled yet proud, his thoughts racing. "I will follow the Lord," he said. "I will not fail him." Samuel's gaze softened, but he spoke with solemn weight. "Remember this. God's power is not a cloak to protect your pride. It is a fire to purify your heart. Walk faithfully and he will bless you. Disobey and no army, no strength, no crown can save you from the consequences." Saul's chest swelled with the thrill of victory, and yet a shadow lingered in his eyes, the first flicker of doubt, ambition, and impatience. The people returned to their homes singing songs of triumph, unaware that their king's greatest battle had only begun. For the crown upon his head was more than gold. It was a test of faith. Samuel turned and watched Saul ride away, wind tossing the king's hair like a herald of destiny. The prophet knew that the path ahead would be full of triumphs and tragedies alike. Saul was chosen, yes, but only obedience would keep him in the favor of God. And so the story of Israel's first king continued, a tale of victory, faith, and the eternal struggle between divine will and human desire. The sun rose over the rugged hills as Saul gathered his army. The Amalekites had grown bold, attacking villages, destroying everything in their path. The Lord commanded through Samuel, "Go and utterly destroy the Amalekites, leave nothing alive, men, women, children, and livestock alike. Obey me fully, and your hands shall be clean in my sight." Saul's heart burned with determination. His army surged forward, swords glinting in the morning light, shields clanging like thunder across the valley. They struck fear into the Amalekites, who scattered before them like chaff in the wind. Victory seemed certain. Saul's men roared in triumph. But as the battle ended, Saul made a choice. Instead of following God's command completely, he spared King Agag, keeping him alive, and allowed the best of the sheep, oxen, and lambs to remain, claiming they were to be sacrificed to the Lord. When Samuel arrived, the prophet's face was grave, shadowed by disappointment. "What have you done?" Samuel demanded. "Behold, the Lord sent you to destroy the Amalekites completely, yet you have disobeyed his command. Why have you done this?" Saul's voice trembled. "I have obeyed the Lord. I have brought back the best of the sheep and oxen to offer as sacrifice to him." Samuel shook his head, sorrow in his eyes. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obedience? Obedience is better than sacrifice, and to heed his command is more than the fat of rams. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king over Israel." The words cut through Saul like a sword. He had won the battle, but he had lost the favor of God. That day the weight of the crown became heavier than ever. A king might command armies, but he could not command obedience. And Saul's first failure would set the stage for a lifetime of struggle between ambition, pride, and the divine will he was chosen to serve. Samuel's eyes blazed as he stood before Saul, the morning sun striking his face like fire. The air between them was thick with unspoken judgment, the weight of God's command pressing down like a stone. "Tell me," Samuel demanded, "what is this that I hear, that you spared King Agag and kept the best of the livestock?" Saul's face flushed. He struggled for words, grasping at excuses. "The people. They spared the animals for sacrifice. I did what I thought right." Samuel shook his head slowly, sorrow and anger entwined. "Do you think the Lord delights in your reasoning more than his command? You have rejected him, and he has rejected you as king. Obedience is the measure of a heart, Saul, not the spoils of war." Saul's courage faltered. His shoulders slumped, the crown of leadership suddenly heavier than iron. The prophet's words cut deeper than any sword. This was a wound no armor could shield. Then Samuel turned to Agag, the Amalekite king, chained and trembling. With a swift motion he carried out the Lord's command, ending the life of the man who had once defied God. The air hung heavy with the scent of judgment, the echo of divine justice ringing in every heart. Saul fell to his knees, grief and fear entwined. "I have sinned. I have failed the Lord." Samuel's eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "The Lord's Spirit has departed from you, Saul. The crown is still yours for a time, but the favor of God will no longer guide your hand. You must now walk the path of a king by your own strength, and it will be a hard road indeed." As Samuel turned and walked away, Saul remained kneeling on the battlefield, the weight of kingship and disobedience pressing down like a relentless storm. From that day forward, Saul would struggle between courage and fear, obedience and pride, divine favor and human desire. The Spirit of God had once empowered him, but now it would test him as no enemy ever could. Years passed and Saul's kingdom stood tall, yet the shadows of disobedience lingered like a storm on the horizon. The people still remembered the victories, but whispers spread through Israel, doubts, unrest, and fear. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David tended his father's flocks. Though small in stature, his heart was fearless, and the Lord's favor already rested upon him. The Philistines gathered once more, bold and merciless, threatening the very tribes of Israel. Saul, now king in name but uncertain in spirit, called his men to battle. The army looked to him for strength, but the spirit that had once filled him had faded. Courage now struggled against fear, and decisions were tainted by pride and anxiety. And then came David, summoned by Samuel, guided by the Lord, and chosen to stand against the mightiest of Israel's enemies. The boy stepped onto the battlefield, sling in hand, heart steady with faith. The giant Goliath, clad in bronze and defiance, towered over him, mocking the armies of Israel. But David's eyes burned with something Saul no longer possessed: trust in God's power, not his own. "You come against me with sword and spear," David said, voice unwavering. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, whom you have defied." The army watched in awe as the young shepherd faced the giant alone. With a single stone, a swing of the sling, and the power of faith, Goliath fell, the ground shaking with the echo of God's justice. The people of Israel erupted in victory and praise. David's courage, his faith, and his triumph became legend that very day. But in Saul's heart, a seed of envy was planted. The king, once chosen and anointed by God, now watched a shepherd rise while he faltered. A shadow of jealousy crept silently, dark and unrelenting, ready to shape the next chapter of his life. David's fame spread like wildfire through the tribes of Israel. Songs of his triumph over Goliath echoed in every home. The people sang of his courage, his faith in the Spirit of God that guided his hand. Saul, once filled with divine favor and victory, now watched from his palace with a heart heavy and unsettled. Every cheer for David, every whispered praise, felt like a dagger in his soul. The spirit that had once lifted him in battle seemed distant, leaving only fear, doubt, and envy in its place. One evening, after a feast in the king's hall, David played his harp. The music, inspired by God, soothed Saul's troubled heart for a moment. But as the melody lingered, a darker feeling took root. "Why should this boy receive honor before me?" Saul muttered, his hands clenching. "He is but a shepherd, yet the people sing his praises. Surely I have been abandoned by the Lord." The envy in Saul's eyes grew sharper than any sword. He called his guards, and the words came out like fire. "Keep him close, yes, but watch him. I cannot trust this boy. His fame threatens my throne." David, unaware of the brewing storm, continued to serve faithfully, his heart devoted to God. But Saul's mind was a battlefield, torn between fear of losing power and the memory of the spirit that once filled him. The seeds of rivalry had been sown. The king who had once been chosen by God now faced a greater enemy than any Philistine, his own jealousy, pride, and the slow, inevitable decay of his faith. And so, the stage was set for a struggle that would shake the very heart of Israel, the rise of David and the fall of Saul. The tension in the palace grew unbearable. Saul's heart was a tempest of fear and anger. Every glance at David reminded him of the spirit he once possessed, the victories that were now fading, and the boy who inspired the people more than he did. One evening, in a rage he could no longer suppress, Saul hurled a spear at David while he played the harp. The weapon struck the wall with a deafening crash, inches from David's head. The young man leapt aside, heart pounding, eyes wide. Saul's face was twisted with fury. "You shall die, boy," he shouted. "How dare you overshadow me in the eyes of Israel?" But David's faith was steadfast. He did not retaliate with sword or anger. Instead, he bowed, humble yet fearless. "The Lord is my shield, O king. He will protect the one he has chosen. I am but a servant of the Lord, and no hand can harm me outside his will." Saul's servants looked on, unsettled by the tension in the room. They whispered among themselves, fearful of their king's wrath and David's divine favor. This was only the beginning. Saul's envy had grown into a silent storm, ready to consume everything in its path. Even as David continued to serve, he could feel the shadow closing. The crown that once symbolized honor and divine anointing had become a source of fear, suspicion, and deadly intent. The Spirit of God that had once lifted Saul now guided David, a shepherd destined to become a king, while the current monarch spiraled toward darkness. The struggle between obedience, pride, and destiny had begun. The palace was filled with tension as Saul's rage boiled over. Unable to tolerate David's rising fame and the favor of God upon him, Saul summoned his guards. "Go, kill him," the king commanded, eyes blazing. "Bring me his life before he eclipses my throne." David, warned by Jonathan and by the spirit that had guided him since his anointing, fled into the night. The cool darkness of the wilderness wrapped around him, a refuge and a trial. He moved silently through the rocky hills and shadowed valleys of Judah, the stars above like witnesses to his peril. Each step was guided not by fear alone, but by faith, a trust in the Lord that Saul's anger could not touch. Saul's soldiers scoured the land, shouting his name, their torches stabbing the darkness. But David, swift and cautious, evaded them, relying on God's protection and the wisdom Samuel had instilled in him. He found temporary refuge in caves and forests where wild animals roamed and the wind howled like the voice of the Almighty. Here he gathered loyal followers, men who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by standing with the chosen of God. Even in exile, David's heart remained steadfast. He did not plot revenge. He did not speak against the king openly. Instead, he prayed, he trusted, and he remembered Samuel's words. "The Lord will fulfill his plans, and those who walk in his ways shall rise." Meanwhile, Saul's anger grew with every failed attempt. The more he pursued, the further David seemed to rise in the eyes of the people. The king's crown weighed heavier with fear, jealousy, and the knowledge that divine favor had shifted. David had become more than a shepherd, more than a warrior. He was now a symbol of God's providence, untouchable by human power, yet hunted relentlessly. David slipped silently through the rugged hills, the moonlight casting shadows on the rocky paths. The wilderness of Adullam stretched before him, a land of caves, cliffs, and hidden valleys, perfect for refuge and strategy. Here, the hunted boy king began to build his strength, not in palaces or thrones, but among men whose hearts had been broken by famine, injustice, and despair. One by one they came to him, men in debt seeking protection, warriors rejected by their own tribes, outcasts longing for a cause greater than themselves. David welcomed them all. "You are with me not for wealth nor for glory, but for the Lord," he told them. "Together we will honor God, protect Israel, and wait upon his timing." In the caves they trained. In the valleys they hunted and survived. In the silence of the night, David prayed, seeking guidance, courage, and the wisdom to lead not just men, but a people chosen by God. Meanwhile, Saul's anger festered in the palace. Every report of David's growing strength stoked his envy. "The boy grows bolder," he fumed. "Soon all Israel will look to him, and I will be forgotten." But the Lord watched over David. Each step, each decision, each friend who came to him was part of a larger plan, a kingdom prepared not by might, but by faith. In the wilderness, David's heart remained humble. Though hunted, he remembered Samuel's words, the anointing, and the spirit that had first come upon him. He knew this: the crown of Israel was promised by God, not seized by swords or fear. And so in the hidden caves of Adullam, a future king began to rise quietly, faithfully, and with the Lord as his guide. The wilderness of Maon was quiet except for the whispering wind. Saul's army scoured the hills, searching relentlessly for the young man who had humiliated the king's pride with victory, fame, and God's favor. David and his men watched from the shadows, hearts pounding, eyes alert. Opportunity came unexpectedly. Saul alone had entered a narrow valley to relieve himself, unaware of David and his loyal men hidden nearby. The king's life lay in David's hands. 1,000 men could not have wielded more power in that single moment. But David's heart did not leap with vengeance. Instead, he whispered to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. Today I will not harm him, for vengeance belongs to God alone." Silently, David crept forward and cut off a corner of Saul's robe, the smallest piece of the king's garment. Then, from the shadows, he called out, "Why do you listen to those who say I am your enemy? See this corner of your robe, and I could have taken your life, but I have not." Saul looked around, startled and shaken. The fear in his heart met the mercy in David's eyes, and for a fleeting moment, humility touched the king. "Is this your voice, David, my son?" Saul asked quietly, awe and fear mingling in his tone. "You are more righteous than I. You will surely be king." David bowed and vanished into the shadows, leaving Saul alive, spared, and haunted by the truth of his failure to obey God. It was a defining moment. David's mercy, faith, and respect for God's will set him apart. The crown might have been threatened by Saul's rage, but the heart of Israel's true king was already evident. A man who would rise, not by bloodshed or ambition, but by obedience to God. Saul returned to the palace, the memory of David's mercy burning in his mind like fire. Every corner of his heart trembled with fear and envy. The boy who had once been a shepherd now commanded respect, inspired loyalty, and bore the Spirit of God in a way Saul no longer could. "The people will not follow me for long," Saul muttered. "They will turn to him, and my throne will crumble." Determined to seize control, Saul plotted with his men. Ambushes, spies, and secret missions were planned, each more dangerous than the last. David, though cautious, remained faithful, guided by prayer, wisdom, and the protection of the Lord. Yet Saul's rage only grew. He could not stand to see his former servant celebrated, praised, or loved more than himself. He consulted mediums, sought forbidden counsel, and even attempted to kill David in his own house. David's escape became more desperate. He fled from city to city, hiding in caves, valleys, and the wilderness, always one step ahead of Saul's army. Every encounter tested his faith, courage, and leadership. Every night he prayed for guidance, strength, and protection, not for vengeance, but for justice. The people of Israel whispered stories of the fugitive king, of the man anointed by God who eluded the king's wrath. David's legend grew, and with it, Saul's envy became a shadow that darkened his every thought. The struggle was no longer just political, it had become spiritual. Saul fought against God's plan with every scheme, while David trusted in the unseen power that had chosen him from the beginning. The stage was set for an epic clash of pride and faith, envy and destiny. One man, hunted yet righteous, guided by God. One king, chosen but forsaken, consumed by his own ambition. David fled further from Saul, crossing into Philistine territory, a dangerous land of enemies and uncertainty. Yet even here, the Lord watched over him. He found refuge in Gath, though his heart remained loyal to Israel, and his faith remained steadfast. The Philistine leaders, wary of this young warrior, welcomed him with suspicion. But David's courage, skill, and wisdom soon earned him a place among their ranks. He learned to navigate the treacherous court, earning allies and gathering intelligence, not for ambition, but for survival. Meanwhile, Saul's obsession grew like a wildfire. Reports of David's presence among the enemy fueled his paranoia. "He mocks me even in exile," Saul fumed. "Soon he will return with power enough to steal my throne entirely." David, aware of Saul's relentless pursuit, remained careful. He avoided unnecessary conflict, moved silently through the hills, and kept the faith that God's timing was perfect. His men grew loyal, drawn to his courage, leadership, and unwavering trust in the Lord. From the wilderness to enemy territory, David's reputation as a just and faithful leader spread. He was more than a fugitive. He was a beacon of hope for those oppressed, a living symbol of God's protection and plan. Yet the shadow of Saul loomed large. Every step forward was haunted by the memory of the king's wrath. Every ally he gained reminded him that God's favor alone would determine his survival. The stage of destiny was being set once more. David, the shepherd-turned-warrior, guided by God. Saul, the fallen king, consumed by envy and fear. And the people of Israel, unaware of how close the kingdom was to being transformed forever. In the shadowed hills of En-Gedi, Saul once again unknowingly walked into the hands of David. The king, weary and alone, had entered a cave to rest, unaware that his pursuer and the anointed of God was near. David's men saw the opportunity. "Now is the moment, my lord," they urged. "Strike, the Lord has delivered your enemy into your hands." David paused, his hand resting on the sword. His heart beat fast, yet he remembered Samuel's words and the voice of God in his life. "Do not harm the Lord's anointed," David whispered. "The Lord will judge him, not I." Silently, David crept forward and cut a corner of Saul's robe. A small token, a proof that he had been there, yet no harm was done. David's heart was heavy but steadfast, a mixture of sorrow, restraint, and faith. Then he called out, his voice echoing in the cave. "Why do you listen to those who say I am your enemy? See this piece of your robe. I could have killed you, but I have not." Saul looked up. Fear and astonishment etched across his face. For a moment, humility softened the king's heart, and he wept. "You are more righteous than I," Saul admitted. "You will surely be king, and I am but a servant in your hands." David bowed low and stepped back into the shadows, sparing the king once more. The people of Israel, if they could have seen, would have witnessed mercy stronger than any sword, faith stronger than any fear. Even in this moment of triumph, David did not claim vengeance or glory. He trusted God's timing, knowing that the Lord's plan would unfold when it was right, not when fear or ambition demanded. And so, in the caves of En-Gedi, the line between justice and mercy was drawn. David's character forged in faith, preparing him for the kingdom God had promised. Saul returned to his palace, his face a mask of fury and shame. The memory of David sparing his life twice tormented him. The king had felt the boy's mercy, and it burned like a wound he could not heal. "How can this be?" Saul muttered. "The Lord's anointed, a mere shepherd, shows me mercy, while I am left powerless and humiliated." The courtiers whispered behind their hands, fearful of the king's temper and awed by David's courage. Every soldier, every servant, every citizen seemed to speak in hushed tones of the young man who eluded the king and yet acted with honor. David's legend spread further. Songs were sung of his bravery, Tales told of his mercy, and whispers of his destiny reached every corner of Israel. The people began to see him not merely as a warrior, but as a man of God, righteous, faithful, and chosen. Saul's envy festered like poison. The king plotted secretly, sending spies and assassins, but David continued to evade every trap. With each escape, his faith in God's protection and guidance strengthened. Yet Saul's shadow loomed over Israel. The king's paranoia grew, spreading fear throughout his court. He knew that he could not openly attack David without drawing the people's ire. But privately, he schemed relentlessly, consumed by jealousy and fear of losing the throne. Meanwhile, David remained steadfast. He did not rejoice in Saul's failures, nor did he seek the throne by force. Every step he took was guided by faith, obedience, and the promise of God that his destiny would unfold in the right time. The kingdom of Israel teetered between loyalty and envy, mercy and ambition, destiny and pride. And the story of David, the shepherd chosen by God, continued to grow, preparing him for the trials, victories, and heartbreak that lay ahead. In the wilderness, David's reputation grew, and so did his followers. Men from every corner of Israel, broken, weary, or seeking justice, flocked to him. They were outcasts, yet each had a heart that recognized David's leadership. Courageous warriors who had been overlooked by their own tribes, faithful men who longed for a righteous cause, those rejected by society, now drawn to the one chosen by God. David welcomed them not as subjects but as brothers in arms. "We are bound together, not for personal gain, but for the Lord," he told them. "We fight for justice, for Israel, and for his glory." Among his loyal band were men of great skill, archers, strategists, and wise counselors. Together they trained in the hidden valleys and caves, learning to survive, fight, and trust each other. David's leadership shone through every challenge. He protected his men, shared their burdens, and never allowed fear to dictate his actions. In turn, they were fiercely loyal, willing to risk everything for the shepherd-turned-king in waiting. Meanwhile, Saul's paranoia grew with each report of David's growing strength. "He gathers men, he wins hearts, he inspires loyalty," the king fumed. "Soon, he will have an army that I cannot command, and my throne will crumble." But David did not seek the throne by force. He moved carefully, obeyed God's guidance, and waited for the Lord's timing. Every alliance he formed, every follower he inspired, was a testament to his wisdom, patience, and faith. In the wilderness, David became more than a fugitive. He became a leader, a symbol of hope, and a man prepared by trials to rule a kingdom according to God's will. The people of Israel began to whisper his name with reverence. "The Lord has chosen him." Saul's anger had become a storm, unrelenting and unpredictable. He sent soldiers and spies into the hills and wilderness, hoping to trap David and his band. Every night brought new threats, every dawn a new peril. But David's mind was sharp, his heart guided by God. He anticipated Saul's moves, laid ambushes, and moved swiftly through secret paths. Every escape strengthened the loyalty of his men and increased his reputation among the people. At times, Saul pursued him in person, blinded by rage. Once again, David had the opportunity to strike, to end the king who hunted him. But the young leader's mercy and faith remained unshaken. "The Lord will deal with him," David said quietly to his men. "We serve him, not our own hands." David's strategic brilliance grew alongside his growing fame. He led his men with discipline and courage, outsmarting larger forces and turning dire situations into victories. He became a master of the wilderness, turning every hill, cave, and valley into an advantage. The people whispered of his cleverness, his mercy, and the Spirit of God that seemed to guide him. Even in exile, David inspired loyalty and hope. The Lord's favor continued to protect him, while Saul's obsession only deepened his isolation and despair. Saul, meanwhile, grew more unstable. "He mocks me at every turn," the king raged. "No man has ever defied me like this and lived." And so the wilderness became more than a refuge for David. It became a proving ground for his courage, faith, and leadership, the crucible in which the future king of Israel was being forged. One night, Saul's men unknowingly walked into David's camp while pursuing him. The king's soldiers, proud and confident, did not expect to meet the very man they hunted. David's men urged him to strike, to avenge the constant pursuit, to seize the chance for power. Yet David's heart remained steadfast. "Do not lay a hand on them," he said calmly. "They are God's servants, and vengeance belongs to the Lord, not us." He treated the soldiers with unexpected mercy, giving them food and sending them back unharmed. The men returned to Saul, bewildered by the young leader's mercy. They spoke not of fear alone, but of awe. "This David, he does not hate us, yet he could destroy us in a moment. There is a spirit upon him, he is chosen by God." David's wisdom became a shield stronger than any sword. He avoided unnecessary bloodshed, protected the innocent, and earned the loyalty of even those who had once sought to harm him. Meanwhile, Saul's jealousy grew uncontrollable. "Even my own men cannot stand against him without admiration," Saul seethed. "Soon all Israel will follow him, and I will be left with nothing." But David did not seek glory or revenge. Every act of mercy, every strategic decision, every prayer in the wilderness strengthened his bond with God. The Spirit that had once anointed him in Ramah now guided him in exile, forging a king who would rule not by fear, but by justice and faith. Even in the shadows, David's light shone brightly, a beacon for Israel and a warning to Saul. The Lord's favor cannot be undone by envy, rage, or human hands. Saul paced the halls of his palace, the weight of his fear and envy pressing on him like a relentless storm. David's legend had spread across Israel, and the king felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "The boy grows stronger every day," Saul muttered. "The people adore him. The Spirit of God is upon him, and my throne feels empty before his shadow." Desperate, Saul turned to forbidden means. He sought out mediums and necromancers, seeking visions, guidance, and even the voices of the dead. Tell me how I can defeat him," Saul demanded, his voice trembling with rage and fear. The spirits whispered in the shadows, but their answers brought no peace. Saul's heart grew darker with each attempt to control the future. His fear and obsession began to cloud his judgment, isolating him further from God and from the people he once led. Meanwhile, David continued to rise. His men were loyal, his reputation untarnished, and his faith unshakable. Every challenge, every trap, every scheme of Saul only honed his leadership and strengthened his reliance on God's guidance. The contrast between the two men became stark. Saul, chosen but abandoned by the Spirit through disobedience and fear. David, chosen by God, growing in wisdom, mercy, and courage, guided by faith rather than ambition. The stage was set for the inevitable confrontation, not just of armies, but of destiny itself. Saul's obsession would lead him further into darkness, while David's trust in God would carry him closer to the throne he had been promised. The kingdom of Israel teetered on the edge, caught between mercy and vengeance, faith and envy, human ambition and divine will. Even in exile, David remained a shepherd of Israel, protecting its people from threats that Saul could no longer face with courage or wisdom. He led raids against marauding Philistines, defended villages from raiders, and ensured that the innocent were safe under his care. His men admired him not only for his bravery, but for his fairness and mercy. "He fights for justice, not glory," one of his followers said, "a king worthy of the Lord's crown." Meanwhile, Saul's kingship was crumbling. His paranoia had driven him to distrust his closest advisers. The people whispered of the young warrior in the wilderness who protected them, while their king pursued personal vendettas. David's acts of protection strengthened his reputation across the land. He was no longer merely a fugitive. He had become a symbol of hope, courage, and divine favor. Saul, on the other hand, grew weaker with every passing day. His anger isolated him, his jealousy consumed him, and the spirit that once guided him had abandoned him. He could command armies, but he could no longer command hearts. In contrast, David's faith and mercy drew people to him naturally. Villages welcomed him, followers rallied, and the Spirit of God guided every step of his path. The winds of destiny were shifting. A new era for Israel was on the horizon, and it would be shaped not by fear, envy, or power, but by courage, wisdom, and obedience to God. Saul's jealousy had turned into an uncontrollable fire. He no longer whispered of David's rise in private. He openly commanded his army to hunt the young leader without mercy. "Bring him to me, dead or alive," Saul bellowed, his eyes blazing with rage. "If he escapes this time, my throne will be lost forever." Spies scoured the wilderness, and soldiers marched through every valley, every hill, and every hidden cave. Yet David, guided by the Spirit and his wisdom, continued to elude them. Every trap Saul set became a testament to David's patience, skill, and divine protection. The tension in Israel grew. The people whispered, "The king hunts the man God has chosen. Who will prevail, the crown or the anointed?" David's band of followers remained loyal, inspired by his courage and faith. He did not attack Saul. He did not seek revenge. Instead, he moved strategically, protecting the innocent, strengthening his leadership, and trusting God's timing. Meanwhile, Saul's mind darkened. He could not eat, could not rest, and even sleep brought visions of David triumphant while he remained king in name only. The spirit that had once empowered him seemed a distant memory, leaving him with only fear, anger, and desperation. The clash between destiny and envy, faith and pride, mercy and vengeance was approaching its peak. The stage was set for the final acts in the tragic struggle between Saul, the fallen king, and David, the shepherd-turned-warrior, chosen by God to lead Israel into a new era. Saul, worn and desperate, once again found himself alone in the wilderness, unaware that David and his men were nearby. The king's pursuit had left him vulnerable, and his soldiers lagged behind in fear and exhaustion. David's men whispered, urging him to strike. "Now is your chance. The Lord has delivered him into your hands." But David remained steadfast. "Do not lay a hand on him," he replied firmly. "The Lord will deal with his anointed. Our duty is faith, not vengeance." David approached quietly, leaving a token proof of his presence, a piece of Saul's robe, as he had done before, and called out to the king, "Why do you pursue me, O king? See that I could have ended you, yet I have not harmed you." Saul looked at David, awe, fear, and guilt flooding his heart. "You are more righteous than I, David," he admitted, tears in his eyes. "You will surely be king, and I am powerless against the will of God." David bowed and stepped back into the shadows, sparing the king once more. It was a moment that defined his character: mercy, patience, faith, and unwavering trust in God's plan. Even Saul, consumed by envy and pride, could not deny the hand of God in David's life. David's path was clear, not through bloodshed, not through scheming, but through obedience, wisdom, and divine favor. The people of Israel, though unaware of the full story, would come to see David as a shepherd, a leader, and a future king chosen by God. The transition of power was not yet complete, but the anointing of destiny was undeniable. Saul's paranoia and envy had consumed him completely. He no longer trusted advisors, ignored the counsel of the prophets, and sought guidance only from forbidden sources. The Philistines gathered against Israel once more, and Saul's kingdom, weakened by fear and disobedience, faltered. His soldiers lacked confidence, and his spirit had long abandoned courage. Meanwhile, David's strength grew. He led his men with wisdom, defended the people of Israel, and inspired loyalty across every tribe. The Spirit of God was with him, guiding every action and shaping the hearts of those around him. Saul, realizing that his time was slipping away, fell into despair. "I have been abandoned by the Lord," he lamented. "I sought to destroy the one he has chosen, and now I see my own power crumbling." The young shepherd who had once tended flocks was now the embodiment of God's favor and protection. David's courage, mercy, and faith had not only preserved his life, but had strengthened Israel in ways Saul's kingship could no longer achieve. The inevitability of Saul's downfall became clear. The king who had once been chosen, anointed, and mighty would now face the consequences of pride, envy, and disobedience. And David, the man of God, prepared quietly for the day when the crown would finally rest in his hands, not through vengeance, but through faith, wisdom, and divine destiny. The Philistines gathered on Mount Gilboa, and Israel faced the greatest threat it had seen in years. Saul, weary, fearful, and abandoned by the Spirit, led his army into battle. The clash was brutal. Swords rang against shields, arrows darkened the sky, and cries of war echoed through the valleys. Saul fought valiantly, but without the Spirit of God to guide him, his efforts faltered. In the chaos, Saul's fate was sealed. Wounded by the enemy and seeing the end approaching, He fell upon his own sword, choosing death over capture. The once mighty king, who had been anointed and chosen, now lay fallen on the battlefield, a tragic testament to pride, envy, and disobedience. David, far from the front lines, heard of Saul's death. His heart was heavy with sorrow. He wept, not for vengeance or triumph, but for the loss of the king and the lessons of mercy, faith, and patience that had defined his journey. With Saul's death, a chapter of Israel closed, a kingdom shaken by envy and fear. And in the wilderness, the shepherd who had trusted God through every trial prepared to rise as the king, chosen by the Lord, blessed with mercy, courage, and unwavering faith. David's path to the throne was ready, a kingdom to lead not by fear or power, but by obedience to God and the wisdom earned through trials. With Saul gone, the tribes of Israel looked to the wilderness hero, who had protected them, inspired them, and shown mercy even to their fallen king. David was called from the hills and caves, from the trials and the battles, to take the throne God had promised. "The Lord has chosen you," Samuel had said long ago, "and his Spirit will guide you in all your ways." In Hebron the people gathered. The elders, the warriors, the faithful and the humble all stood as David was anointed king. The oil poured upon his head, a symbol of God's favor, and the Spirit filled him once more, this time not as a shepherd or fugitive, but as King of Israel. David looked across the faces of the people, remembering every trial, every cave, every act of mercy, and every prayer whispered in the wilderness. He had learned that true power lay not in the sword, but in faith, obedience, and the courage to do what was right. Under his reign, Israel would grow strong, united, and guided by the Lord. David, the shepherd boy who faced giants, spared kings, and led with mercy, now carried the crown, not by ambition but by destiny, faith, and the hand of God. And so, the story of David began in full glory. A king chosen by God, tempered by trials, guided by faith, and remembered forever as a man after God's own heart.